Hola, my name is Vanessa Claros. I am a proud first-generation American and an aspiring Latinx librarian. I have been employed in the library arena for over 7 years, and I've worked in public libraries, an academic library, and most recently, a military library. I've held various roles in access services and technical services, and my bilingualism and cultural heritage has allowed me to spread the richness of my culture in the libraries that I have worked for through bilingual story times, a Cinco de Mayo celebration, Dia de los Muertos celebration, and ofrendas, and a series of bilingual adult crafts. My passion is serving the underserved and marginalized populations, and in this presentation I will be focusing on how to engage our Latinx communities and help them realize that bibliotecas sí son para ellos, that libraries are for them. This presentation is for everyone that works with their community, adult services librarians, marketing and outreach librarians, and even youth services librarians that may be able to gain more insight about what issues affect their youngest Latinx patrons. After watching this webinar, I hope you will feel better prepared to serve the needs of your Latinx communities. If you have any suggestions, comments, or just want to connect, I will link my LinkedIn at the end and leave my email. Gracias y bienvenidos. As library professionals, we strive our best always to serve everyone, and although unintentionally, when we do not engage with the Latinx community, we are not fulfilling their informational and cultural needs. This is a topic that's very important for me because when I was a child, I had a difficult time getting to my local library, and libraries were just not in my culture. They were just not something that was important for my family. My parents immigrated from Mexico and they did not speak English. My mom did not know how to drive, and we only visited a library when I needed help on a project and we could find a ride. My mom and my dad had never visited a library until they immigrated to the United States, since there weren't any libraries in their hometowns. And although I only visited my local library a couple of times during my childhood, my recollections were always positive. When I needed help finding a book or a resource, I was always treated with compassion and empathy. This was in the late 90s when there were no Latinx librarians or Spanish-speaking employees at my local library, and I formulated my inquiries as best as I could since English is my second language and my parents did not speak English. I was always afraid to say something incorrectly, but I was a brave little girl, I have to say. I had to be. Over the years, I've learned that libraries belong to everyone. Bibliotecas sí son pa mi gente. But why is the Latinx community so important to libraries? Of course, this is obvious, but as our nation continues to grow more racially and ethnically diverse, the Latinx population remains an important part of our country. In 2019, the Latinx population reached a record 60.6 million. And by 2021, the Latinx population had climbed to 62.6 million, making people of Latinx origin the country's largest racial or ethnic minority. And this is coming from the United States Census Bureau. So to put this into perspective, the Latinx community makes up 18.9% of the nation's population. Yet there was a landmark survey in 2013 from the Pew Research Center that showed that this group is the least likely to visit a public library, and we do need to do more to reach them. Most importantly, our duty as librarians should be to provide equitable access to all, including underserved communities. But how do we reach the Latinx community? We have to inform ourselves about what affects them, and we also need to break stereotypes. Although the Latinx population is the group that is least likely to visit a public library. The same Pew Research Center surveyed showed that Latinx individuals who have visited a public library are the most appreciative of the services and the quiet and safe space that libraries offer. So we need to effectively plan services and programming for the Latinx community, and a library professional must be culturally aware and be able to understand the barriers the community faces and the hardships that they endure. Lung and Jeffrey, two youth services librarians, add that, quote, one major difficulty in reaching underserved populations is due to our own ignorance. They urge library professionals who serve underserved populations to ask themselves, 1. What barriers are preventing underserved groups from accessing library services? And 2. Do my library values overlap with the community values? If you work in a library that has a large Latinx population, you probably are asking yourselves, what is keeping them from visiting their local libraries? And one explanation is that they may have formed misconceptions about what a library is, since the word library is very similar to the word librería, the Spanish word for bookstore, and they may feel like they can't afford the material. Carmen Patlan, the Community Engagement and Spanish Literacy Services Manager at Waukegan Public Library in Illinois, affirms that she's had Latinos ask how much the library books cost. Howard Rodriguez Mori, a library and information science scholar who has focused his research on libraries and multicultural services, adds that his experience with libraries in his home country and the experience of other Latinx individuals may be keeping them from visiting their local libraries. He states, quote, the library in Puerto Rico was just an archive of old, outdated books in a small room open during very limited hours, end quote. His experience seems to be common for other Latinx. The result of 13 phenomenological interviews with individuals who identify as Latinx revealed that many of the participants never visited a library in their country of origin. When one participant was asked whether she used her libraries in her home country, El Salvador, she answered, quote, no, where we lived, libraries didn't even exist, end quote. Clearly, the lack of access to libraries and the lack of experience with libraries in their home country could be one of the reasons behind the inconsistent use of libraries in the Latinx community. Lastly, a powerful barrier keeping Latinx immigrants from seeking help from institutions stems from their fear of government agencies and their ties to deportation. Immigrants don't want to expose themselves, and some do not trust strangers. They may need information, but they may be hesitant to approach a reference desk because they are afraid that they will be asked about their citizenship status. I've personally witnessed this when I worked for a large library system in Metro Atlanta. The first library branch that I worked at was in a community with a large Latinx representation, but a lot of them did not have a library card. I once had a Latinx parent approach me, and when he saw my Yo Hablo Español badge, he asked me in Spanish if he could check out books for his children without a Georgia ID. It is important to note that in the state of Georgia, you must be able to prove your immigration status or lawful presence in the state to get an ID or a driver's license. I informed him that he didn't need a state-issued ID, and he asked if he could use his passport from his native country. After I said yes, he opened a card. In another instance, when I set up a table outside of a carniceria, a Mexican meat market, I asked a Latinx woman if she had already opened a library card, and her response was, quote, no tengo papeles, end quote, I don't have papers. I explained to her that she did not need to be a legal citizen to open a card if she had proof of residency. She had an electric bill in her car, and I was able to open a card for her there. These two scenarios have reaffirmed my drive to engage my Latinx community, inform them about our offerings, and get them inside our libraries regardless of immigration status. Community building is the cornerstone of libraries, and we need to identify community leaders and partnership opportunities. Me being bilingual and Latinx has helped me connect with the Hispanic community, and having a Latinx librarian on staff would be an asset to any library team that is trying to reach the Latinx community, since their experiences, traditions, and cultural norms are similar. Romeo Rosales, a reference Latinx librarian at FAR, Texas Memorial Library, who serves a large Hispanic population, adds, quote, Latinx librarians are able to connect with our patrons on a much deeper level because we understand the Hispanic culture and we have grown up in the same areas many of our patrons have, end quote. He adds that Latinx librarians are not better librarians than those who may not speak Spanish or understand the culture, but they have the ability to provide feedback about Latinx communities and their culture. He also explains that it is important to recognize that there are many important cultural differences in the Latinx community, and simply acknowledging their needs and presence in our community is a step forward. Of course, every library system should make an effort to hire library staff that reflect the cultural richness of their communities and celebrate their community's diversity. But if this is not a possibility, they should look for ways to partner with community leaders, since they've already earned their trust. Churches and local businesses are good starting points. As I've mentioned before, I set up a table outside of a carniceria in my community, and I also set up one outside of a laundromat. I identified the potential partnership opportunities by driving around my branch, and I identified businesses with Latinx patronage. Then I spoke to the business owners in person and explained the benefits of the partnership. Although the partnership was short-lived since I relocated out of state, I regularly dropped off flyers to the businesses, and they placed the flyers on their bulletin boards, and the carniceria owner reassured me that he would hand out the flyers to their customers when they paid. I knew the partnership was successful when I opened a library card for a patron at the carniceria, and the next week she went to the library and reminded me that she had met me at the carniceria. Although I drove around their neighborhood looking for partnership opportunities, another way to search for names of prominent community members is through local Spanish newspapers and speaking with social services agencies, Hispanic associations, and also chambers of commerce. Another way to attract Latinx communities into libraries is by using promotores like the Waukegan Public Library. And promotores are Spanish-speaking volunteers that go out in their community and promote the library's services. Promotores also recruit new volunteers to do the same and spread the word about the library's services. So once you find community partnerships and community leaders that can help you, next you have to plan diverse and relevant programs for Latinx communities and promote them. You have to let your community know what you have to offer. Once you have identified potential partners, collaborate with them to plan diverse and relevant programs for your community, and also promote them and market them. You have to let the community know what you offer. A study conducted to assess how a public library in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, a county that has seen an exponential growth of Latinx, showed that they were not meeting the needs of their Latinx community, since they had programs that were relevant to their community, but their outreach efforts were not all there. One part of the study asked Latinx participants to suggest 3 services or programs that they would like their library to offer. The most often requested programs were English as a second language class, homework help, help with reading, more programming for school-aged children, workshops for parents, Spanish story time, and help with job skills. The results indicated that there was a disconnect between the library services and its community, since the respondents asked for programs that the library already offered. They already had ESL class, they already had homework help, and they already had programs for families. This meant that the library was not effectively informing their community about their services, and the community was not aware of all of their offerings. Thus, you must be intentional with your outreach efforts. Through interviews with the Latinx community members and Spanish-speaking outreach librarians, the study resulted in 3 tactics to implement more effective outreach practices. First, develop partnerships with local leaders. Second, engage Latinx groups in churches and school meetings. And lastly, ensure marketing materials are in Spanish and English. Although planning programming that is of interest to Latinx communities is essential, as the study above show, promotion and awareness is as important. With this in mind, the Los Angeles Public Library, which serves the largest and most diverse urban population of any library in the country, ignited collaborative efforts across its departments to help promote and expand their services. They first created an internal Spanish language translations team to produce Spanish language translations of flyers, forms, brochures, and web pages. They also established a Spanish language Twitter account to promote Spanish and bilingual programs. Spanish-speaking staff were also encouraged to create blog posts, music playlists, and book lists in Spanish, and the content was published on their website. Lastly, the Los Angeles Public Library has 5 bilingual outreach librarians on staff that provide outreach to Spanish-speaking communities via events, programs, and partnerships. So what can you do to engage the Latinx community? First, start small. If you or your colleagues speak Spanish, make a small laminated sign that says "Hablo Español" and attach it to your name badge. When I did this, I printed off a small colorful sign in Word, I laminated it, and used double-sided tape to attach it to my name tag. It was free and helpful. The results were fast since non-English speaking customers felt comfortable approaching me and did not have to assume whether I spoke Spanish or not. If you do not know Spanish, learn a few helpful phrases like "Hola, ¿cómo está? Bienvenido a la biblioteca." Also, Mango Languages has a specialty course called Spanish for Librarians. Next, plan programming that celebrates Latinx culture and that brings new residents who mistrust institutions into the library. Hispanic Heritage Month runs from September 15th to October 15th, but some libraries like the San Francisco Public Library run Latinx cultural programs for more than a month to foster cultural awareness in their community. Some programming ideas include Dia de los Muertos ofrendas, a parranda navideña, which is a social event during the holiday season, a Latinx superhero showcase, and bilingual story time. Another takeaway is that you have to be aware of what barriers affect the Latinx community and serve with empathy. Immigration is an important but very difficult issue for the Latinx community. I've personally witnessed some of my family members being arrested and deported for not being able to get a driver's license, and immigration status is a barrier that affects a large portion of the Latinx community. It can cause them to feel scared to approach a government entity, and not having a driver's license can prevent them from visiting the library, which leads me to my next point. Leave the library's walls, find outreach and partnership opportunities, begin by scanning your community, and ask Latinx patrons that are already coming into your library what landmarks are important for them. Churches, schools, restaurants, and laundromats are places to start. Once you've identified potential partners, call them or visit their establishments to discuss partnership opportunities. If you have a book mobile, be intentional and park it at locations that you have identified. Take Spanish material with you, Spanish publicity, and host bilingual story times there. I really hope that this webinar has been informative and that you will be able to take something back to your library and, more importantly, to your community and connect with your Latinx communities. Bibliotecas son para todos. Bibliotecas son pa mi gente. feel free to connect with me and send me any suggestions that you may have. Gracias y buena suerte.